The abandoned warehouse echoed with the sound of Samuel's boots against concrete as he swept his flashlight beam across the empty space. His German Shepherd Rex had been acting strange all evening during their security rounds, repeatedly returning to this particular building despite Samuel's attempts to continue their patrol route. Now, at nearly midnight, Rex stood rigid at the far end of the warehouse, his ears pricked forward and a low whine escaping his throat. Samuel had learned to trust his canine partner's instincts completely during their time together, both overseas and in their current work as private security guards for the industrial district. Something about Rex's posture tonight reminded him of those tense moments in combat when the dog's behavior had meant the difference between life and death. The flashlight beam caught something glinting in the corner where Rex was focused, and as Samuel approached, he realized it wasn't debris or discarded equipment. It was a small, silver locket partially buried under years of dust and neglect. Rex's tail wagged once deliberately, as if it had been searching for this exact item all along. The moment Samuel's fingers closed around the locket, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the soft sobbing of someone who'd been trying desperately not to be found. Following the sound deeper into the warehouse shadows, Samuel discovered an elderly woman huddled behind a stack of old shipping pallets, her thin frame wrapped in a tattered coat that had once been expensive. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she clutched a piece of paper in her trembling hands with the desperation of someone holding onto her last hope. "Please," she whispered when she saw Samuel and Rex approaching, "please don't call the police. I'm not here to steal anything. I'm just looking for something that belongs to me." Rex moved forward cautiously, his aggressive posture softening as he sensed the woman's genuine distress rather than any threat. The German Shepherd's training had taught him to distinguish between danger and desperation, and this woman radiated the kind of hopelessness that came from carrying an unbearable burden alone.
"Are you all right?"
Samuel lowered his flashlight to avoid blinding her and knelt down to her eye level, a technique he'd learned both in military de-escalation training and from years of dealing with his own PTSD episodes. "Ma'am, my name is Samuel Torres, and this is Rex. We're security guards here, but we're not going to hurt you. Can you tell me what you're looking for?" The woman's grip on the paper tightened, and Samuel noticed it was actually a very old letter, the edges worn soft from decades of handling. "My name is Eleanor Hartwell," the woman said, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of the industrial district. 53 years ago, my husband worked in this warehouse before he shipped out to serve overseas. He hid something here before he left, something he promised to come back for. Her eyes filled with fresh tears as she continued. But he never made it home.
I can't believe this
He was
is
killed in
happening.
action just 3 weeks before the war ended. I've spent half a century wondering what he hid here, and now they're going to demolish this building next month. Rex had positioned himself beside Eleanor, his massive head resting gently against her arm in a gesture of comfort that spoke to his deep understanding of human pain. Samuel felt his own chest tighten with recognition, knowing all too well the weight of promises that could never be fulfilled and the haunting questions left by those who never came home. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said softly, "what makes you think whatever your husband hid is still here after all these years?" Eleanor held up the letter with shaking hands. "Because he wrote me very specific instructions in his last letter home. He said had hidden our future in the place where we first danced, and that if anything happened to him, I should look for the silver locket that would lead me to our dreams." She gestured weakly toward the locket Samuel still held in his hand. "That's my locket. I lost it here during the company Christmas party in 1970. Michael said had found it and would keep it safe until he got home. The pieces began falling into place as Samuel examined the locket more closely, noticing an engraving on the back that read to Eleanor, "My dancing queen, love always, Michael." Rex's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. The dog had somehow detected the connection between the lost locket and the grieving woman, following an instinct that went beyond mere scent tracking. Samuel had heard stories about dogs who seemed to understand the deeper currents of human need, but experiencing it firsthand felt like witnessing something sacred. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said carefully, "this locket has your name on it." Rex found it buried in the exact spot where it had been acting strange all week. "I think he somehow knew you needed it." Eleanor's eyes widened as she took the locket from his outstretched hand, her fingers tracing the familiar engraving with wonder. "This is impossible," she whispered. "How could your dog know to look for something that's been lost for over 50 years? Samuel shook his head, equally mystified but unwilling to question what felt like divine intervention. "I don't know, ma'am, but Rex has never been wrong about important things. If he led us to your locket, then maybe he can help us find whatever else your husband left behind." The warehouse suddenly felt less abandoned and more like a cathedral where forgotten prayers were finally being answered. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened the locket, revealing 2 tiny photographs, one of a young couple dancing at what appeared to be the same warehouse decorated for a company party, and another of a baby who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. "That's us at the Christmas dance," she said, her voice thick with memory. "And that's our son, David. He was just a baby when Michael shipped out." Samuel felt his throat constrict as he processed the implications of her words. "Your husband never met his son." Eleanor shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "David was born 3 months after Michael left. He never even knew he had a child. I wrote him letters every week telling him about the baby, but none of them reached him before he was killed." Rex whined softly and nudged Eleanor's hand, as if sensing the depth of her grief and wanting to offer what comfort he could. The German Shepherd's dark eyes seemed to reflect an understanding that went beyond animal instinct, and Samuel found himself wondering if Rex somehow carried the memories of all the military working dogs who had served alongside soldiers who never made it home. "Mrs. Hartwell," Samuel said gently, "your husband's letter mentioned that what he hid would lead to your future. Do you have any idea what he might have meant?" Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. "He wrote about buying land somewhere, about building us a house where we could raise David and maybe have more children. But I never found any papers, any deeds, any bank accounts. After he died, I had to work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table." The mention of hidden documents sparked Samuel's investigative instincts, honed through years of military intelligence work and sharpened by his current security experience. "Mrs. Hartwell, when your husband wrote about hiding something in the place where you first danced, do you remember exactly where that was in this warehouse?" Eleanor nodded toward the center of the vast space. "Right there where that concrete pillar stands. They hung mistletoe from the ceiling beam during the Christmas party, and Michael spun me around that pillar like we were in a grand ballroom." Rex was already moving toward the area Shed indicated, his nose working methodically along the base of the pillar. The German Shepherd began pawing at a particular section of the concrete floor where the surface appeared slightly different from the surrounding area. Samuel knelt beside his partner and ran his hands over the concrete, discovering that what looked like solid flooring was actually a carefully disguised access panel. "Rex found something," he called to Eleanor, who was struggling to her feet despite her obvious physical frailty. The panel lifted easily once Samuel found the right leverage point, revealing a metal box wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow remained dry despite decades of warehouse humidity. Rex's tail wagged with quiet satisfaction as Eleanor gasped and covered her mouth with both hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He really did it. Michael really left something for us." Inside the waterproof wrapping, they discovered a collection of documents that represented a young soldier's careful planning for a future he'd never lived to see. There was a deed to 40 acres of land in rural Montana, purchased with Michael's deployment savings, and held in trust for Eleanor and any children they might have. Bank account information showed a substantial sum that had been accumulating interest for over 5 decades, along with detailed instructions for accessing military survivor benefits that Eleanor had never known existed. Most precious of all was a thick letter addressed to Eleanor and their unborn child, sealed in wax and marked to be opened only if I don't come home to deliver this in person. Eleanor's hands shook so violently that Samuel had to help her hold the papers steady enough to read them. Rex positioned himself protectively beside her, his warm presence anchoring her to the present moment as she absorbed the magnitude of her husband's final gift. He knew, she whispered through her tears. Somehow Michael knew he might not make it home, and he prepared for our future anyway. The letter contained not just expressions of love and regret, but practical advice about managing the land, investing the money, and raising their child with values that would honor his father's sacrifice. Samuel found himself thinking about the countless soldiers who had made similar provisions, leaving pieces of themselves behind in case they couldn't return to deliver their promises in person. Samuel helped Eleanor carefully refold the documents and secure them in the metal box, but she kept the final letter pressed against her chest, as if trying to absorb her husband's words through her heart. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said gently, "this land deed and these bank accounts, they are still legally yours. With proper legal assistance, you should be able to claim everything your husband left for you and your son." Eleanor looked up at him with eyes that seemed decades younger than they had when had first found her in the shadows. "My son David is 53 years old now. He's struggled his whole life, working odd jobs and never quite getting ahead. He thinks his father abandoned us, that he never cared enough to provide for his family." She clutched the letter tighter. "But now I can show him the truth. I can show him that his father loved us enough to sacrifice everything, even his own dreams, to make sure we'd be taken care of." Rex seemed to sense the emotional weight of the moment, his usually alert posture relaxing into something that looked remarkably like contentment. Samuel realized that his canine partner had somehow understood the mission from the beginning, leading them through a week of strange behavior to this exact moment of revelation. The warehouse no longer felt abandoned or forgotten. Instead, it hummed with the energy of promises finally fulfilled and love that had transcended death itself. Eleanor insisted on calling her son immediately, despite the late hour, her voice animated with excitement as she tried to explain the miraculous discovery. Samuel listened to her side of the conversation, hearing David's confusion transform into wonder as his mother described the hidden documents and his father's carefully planned provisions. "He wants to meet you," Eleanor said after ending the call, her eyes bright with tears of joy rather than grief. "He wants to thank the man and dog who helped his mother find his father's final gift." Rex's tail thumped against the concrete floor, and Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that his partner understood every word of the conversation. Over the next several hours, as they waited for David's arrival, Eleanor shared stories about Michael that painted a picture of a young man who had approached military service with the same methodical planning had applied to providing for his family. Samuel found himself thinking about the soldiers had served alongside, wondering how many of them had made similar preparations and whether their families had ever discovered the extent of their sacrifice. When David arrived just before dawn, the resemblance to the young soldier in Eleanor's locket was unmistakable, and Samuel watched a son meet his father's memory for the first time through the tangible proof of paternal love. Rex greeted David with the same gentle demeanor had shown Eleanor, as if recognizing him as part of the family they'd been meant to help reunite. The reunion between Eleanor and David took on dimensions that went far beyond the discovery of hidden assets. As they sat together in the warehouse where everything had begun, David read his father's letter aloud, his voice breaking as he encountered words of advice meant for the son Michael had never been able to hold. "He wrote about teaching you to fish in the streams on the Montana land," Eleanor said softly. "He wrote about building tree houses and showing you how to be strong without being cruel." David's eyes filled with tears as he realized the father had resented for being absent had actually spent his final weeks planning a lifetime of experiences they might share. Samuel found himself deeply moved by the scene, remembering his own father's return from deployment and the precious ordinariness of the moments they'd shared. Rex had positioned himself between Eleanor and David, his presence somehow blessing the reunion and marking the completion of a mission that had taken 5 decades to accomplish. "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become," Eleanor told her son. "And now we can visit the land he bought for us. We can see the dreams he had for our family." David reached over to stroke Rex's head, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Thank you," he said to both Samuel and the dog. "Thank you for helping my mother find what we never knew we'd lost." The warehouse demolition was postponed for 2 weeks to allow Eleanor and David time to properly explore the space where their family's story had been preserved. They brought flowers and a small memorial plaque to mark the spot where Michael's final gift had waited patiently for discovery. Samuel and Rex visited several times during those weeks, watching the Hartwell family grow as David brought his own children to meet the grandmother who had suddenly transformed from a struggling elderly woman into the guardian of a family legacy they'd never known existed. Eleanor's health seemed to improve dramatically as she found purpose in sharing Michael's story and planning visits to the Montana land that would soon become a gathering place for the extended family her husband had envisioned. Rex appeared to take deep satisfaction in these visits, his tail wagging as he greeted the Hartwell grandchildren who had quickly adopted him as an honorary family member. Samuel realized that his canine partner had somehow understood that their security patrol job was just the vehicle for a much more important mission, one that connected the past to the present through the persistence of love and the mysterious intelligence of dogs who seemed to carry the memories of all the soldiers who never made it home. As Samuel reflected on the events that had brought them to this moment, he understood that Rex's behavior hadn't been strange or random at all, but rather the manifestation of something deeper than ordinary animal instinct. Dogs who served alongside military personnel seemed to carry a genetic memory of duty that extended beyond their own lifespans, connecting them to the unfinished business of warriors who had fallen before their missions were complete. Eleanor had kept Michael's final letter, but shared excerpts with Samuel that revealed a young soldier's profound understanding that love was the only force capable of transcending death. "Take care of my Eleanor and our baby," Michael had written. "Help them remember that every sacrifice has meaning if it makes the world safer for the people we love." Those words had taken on new significance as Samuel watched Rex interact with the Hartwell family, realizing that his partner's mysterious behavior had been guided by exactly the kind of protective instinct Michael had hoped would watch over his family. The warehouse demolition finally proceeded on schedule, but not before Eleanor had organized a small ceremony to honor all the forgotten promises that might be buried in similar places around the world. Samuel and Rex attended, along with several other veterans who had heard the story and wanted to pay their respects to a brother in arms whose love had proven stronger than time itself. The Montana land that Michael Hartwell had purchased sight unseen turned out to be a perfect reflection of his dreams for his family's future. Eleanor and David made their first visit in late spring, bringing Samuel and Rex along as honored guests who had made the reunion possible. The 40 acres included a natural stream perfect for fishing, rolling meadows ideal for children to explore, and a grove of mature oak trees that seemed designed for the tree houses Michael had written about building for his son. David had used some of the accumulated money to build a modest cabin on the property, creating a gathering place where the Hartwell family could reconnect with the dreams of a man they'd never been able to properly mourn. Rex seemed completely at home on the land, running through the meadows with an enthusiasm that reminded Samuel of his partner's younger days, before the weight of too many missions had settled into his bones. Eleanor spent hours sitting by the stream, reading Michael's letters aloud to the grandchildren had never met, but somehow provided for through his careful planning and enduring love. Samuel found himself thinking about the circular nature of promises and the way they could travel through generations, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves and transform ordinary lives into something extraordinary. Tell us where you're listening to this story from, and share a memory of the most loyal companion who ever walked beside you through life's toughest moments. The success of Eleanor's reunion with her husband's legacy inspired Samuel to consider how many other families might be carrying similar burdens of unfinished business and unanswered questions. Rex's uncanny ability to detect hidden truths suggested that some dogs possessed an almost supernatural connection to the emotional needs of the humans around them, particularly those who carried the weight of military service and its aftermath. Samuel began volunteering at the local Veterans Center, bringing Rex along to interact with other former service members who struggled with their own unresolved grief and lingering questions. The German Shepherd seemed to gravitate toward veterans whose pain ran deepest, offering the kind of wordless comfort that could only come from a creature who understood loyalty in its purest form. Eleanor and David joined them at these gatherings, sharing Michael's story as proof that love could survive even the most devastating separations, and that hope was never truly lost as long as someone was willing to keep searching. The Montana property became an annual gathering place for veterans and their families, a place where stories could be shared and promises could be honored even decades after they were made. Samuel realized that his partnership with Rex had evolved beyond mere security work into something that felt more like a calling, helping to complete the unfinished business of warriors whose missions had been cut short by forces beyond their control. Share this mission of reuniting families with their hidden legacies by subscribing, so these stories can reach others who might be searching for their own lost promises. The warehouse district where everything had begun was eventually redeveloped into a memorial park dedicated to the memory of workers and soldiers whose contributions had been forgotten by time, but not by the hearts of those who loved them. Eleanor and David donated funds for a bronze statue of a soldier and his dog, commemorating not just Michael's story, but all the faithful companions who had served alongside America's veterans throughout the decades. Rex lived to see the memorial unveiled, his aging body still strong enough to sit at attention during the dedication ceremony, as if he understood the significance of the moment. Samuel spoke at the ceremony about the mysterious ways that loyalty could transcend death, connecting past and present through the persistent love of both humans and the animals who served alongside them. Eleanor, now in her 80s but energized by the completion of her life's most important mission, shared Michael's story one final time, emphasizing that the greatest victories were often won not on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when promises were finally kept. The memorial became a pilgrimage site for families seeking their own closure, many bringing their own service dogs and emotional support animals to honor the bond between veterans and the faithful companions who helped them navigate both war and peace. Samuel's own understanding of his purpose had been transformed by the warehouse discovery, shifting from mere survival to active service in helping others complete their own unfinished missions. Rex had taught him that some callings could only be recognized through the mysterious intelligence of creatures who seemed to carry the collective memory of all who had served and sacrificed before them. As they continued their work together, helping other families uncover hidden legacies and forgotten promises, Samuel realized that every veteran carried similar stories of love interrupted but never destroyed by the circumstances of war. The Montana gatherings grew each year, becoming a tradition that honored not just Michael Hartwell's memory, but all the promises that waited patiently in the shadows for someone brave enough to keep searching. Eleanor lived to see her great-grandchildren play in the meadows their great-great-grandfather had purchased for them, fulfilling his dreams of family gatherings he could only imagine from a distant battlefield. Rex's legacy became intertwined with Michael's, two faithful servants whose loyalty had bridged the gap between loss and restoration, proving that some missions could take generations to complete, but would never be abandoned as long as love endured. Thank you for walking alongside these stories of courage, loyalty, and promises kept across the years. Our next journey awaits, where another faithful companion will guide us toward truth that has been waiting decades to be discovered. We honor every veteran and the families who keep their memories alive, knowing that their sacrifices continue to shape the world through the love they left behind.